Hey there, welcome to Blockhead, the podcast where cartoonists talk comics and just about everything else. My name is Geoff Grogan. I'm a cartoonist, animator, and illustrator, and for the next hour or so, I'll be your host in a series of conversations with comics creators about their lives, their work, and comics. So sit back and enjoy. Hey gang, welcome to a very special episode of Blockhead. Today we are celebrating that seminal work of cartoon art, that classic comic strip Nancy by Ernie Bushmiller, and the Nancy Fest and the Nancy Show happening at the Billy Ireland Museum in only a couple of weeks. Opening May 24th and May 25th, the Nancy Fest, this incredible two-day celebration of Nancy and all things Nancy, featuring a great array of wonderful guests, great presentations, a buffet of Nancy-style food and cosplay, people dressed up as Nancy and Sluggo and Fritzy Ritz and all the other sort of incidental characters in Nancy. It's just incredible. And the Nancy Fest is not all that's happening, because the Nancy Fest is in celebration of the great exhibition curated by Brian Walker, The Nancy Show, which is up for several months, actually all through the summer and into the fall. The Nancy Show featuring a collection of great artwork brought together, not only Ernie Bushmiller's work, but also that of those who followed Ernie on the strip itself, right up to this very day, as well as some wonderful paintings by Andy Warhol and Patrick McDonnell and others who've explored Nancy. I mean, it's just going to be incredible. It's incredible. I can't wait to see the show when I'm out there for Crossroads Columbus in September. I hope you get a chance to go to it sooner than that, sometime over the summer, if you can make your way out to Columbus to visit the Billy Ireland. It's going to be a great show for all of us who love this wonderful comic strip. This terrific work of cartoon art by Ernie Bushmiller. And so today, to help us celebrate, I couldn't be more excited. We have three of the most important figures in this event. We have, of course, Brian Walker, friend of the show, curator of the Nancy Show itself. And then we have Tom Gammill, who is like the Nancy expert par excellence, the great collector of Nancy comic art. Not to mention, Tom is also a terrific TV writer. He's written for Seinfeld and Curb Your Enthusiasm. And last but not least, straight from the Billy Ireland itself, we have Caitlin McGurk, who is here to talk about everything that's going on inside the Billy Ireland, as well as her acting debut in a play written by Tom Gammill about a day in the life of Ernie Bushmiller. And it's so exciting. And so without further ado, why don't we get right into it with these three terrific people who I am so honored to have here today to talk about Nancy. Tom Gammill, Brian Walker, Caitlin McGurk, and myself in conversation. I'll see you on the other side. Hey, hello, Tom.
Hey, Andy, how you doing?
All right, how are you doing?
Good. Where are you coming from?
Long Island, Garden City, Long Island. That's not where I live.
Nice.
That's where I work.
Oh, excellent. Where do you live?
I live in upstate New York, Binghamton, New York.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, sort of. It has its moments. You're in L.A.?
Yeah, I'm in outside of LA in Altadena. I grew up in Connecticut, though.
Oh, whereabouts?
In Darien.
Oh, I know Darien. Yep.
Yeah,
Sure.
right where all those cartoonists were, like in that around.
Yeah, Westport, Darien, Stanford, that whole area. Sure.
Yeah,
Hey,
exactly.
Brian. I don't know if there he is. Hi, Brian.
How you doing?
Okay, how are you?
Hey, let me just get everything turned on here. Okay.
Sure. Great. And I think we're just waiting for Caitlin, right? Yeah.
Hey, Brian, how's it going?
All right.
Oh, goodness gracious. Yeah, without Caitlin, we're just three old guys.
Yeah, that's right.
Let her do all the talking.
Yeah, not a bad
She's
idea.
got a much better personality.
Yeah. Goodness gracious. How you been, Brian?
I've been good, very busy,
Yeah.
which is good. I was
Yeah.
complaining to my wife about a year ago. I said, this is the first time in about 15 years I haven't had a major 2 year sort of book or exhibit project or something. Um, and then all of a sudden I've got two exhibits and a book and two more books coming maybe next year.
Oh,
And
God.
Hey,
Be careful.
Caitlin.
Yeah.
I
Hi,
can't.
everybody.
Hello,
Hi.
Caitlin.
How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good.
Good.
Good, good. So, folks,
Tom, you look like you have a new hairdo.
I was an Ernie Bushmiller buzz cut, but I had two big shows this weekend. We had
Good.
Patrick McDonald and Geoff Keane and Jerry Scott. Also,
Awesome.
yeah, it went really well.
Good, good.
Yeah.
so you did you do your play? Is that what you're talking
Yeah,
about?
I've been doing practice ones here at my house. It's a 22-seat theater, and it's
Oh,
been going. So it's been good to just because I'm not much of an actor, so I'm every time you do it, it gets a little better, I think.
you're used.
So
I'm sorry, you're used to being on the other side. You're a writer for TV shows and whatnot.
yeah. But I'm
Yeah.
very excited. Caitlin is going to be playing the actress in the play at Nancy Fest, so that's going to be really fun. So we've
Yeah.
been zooming. We're going to Zoom this Friday, right?
Yeah, we're doing this Friday, and then I'm going out to LA to rehearse in person with Tom next week. So
Yeah. That'll be fun.
Well, I suppose I should introduce everyone because just so you know, we are recording. And I suppose I should just say welcome to Blockhead, Tom Gammill, Caitlin McGurk, and Brian Walker. And we're here to talk about Ernie Bushmiller, Nancy Fest, and the Nancy Show, all happening at the Billy Ireland Museum in May, right? May 24th and
right.
25th. And what Tom and Caitlin are referring to is a play. Is it a one-act play, Tom?
Yes, yeah,
About the life of,
totally now.
and it's about Ernie Bushmiller or a morning in Ernie Bushmiller's life.
Yeah, it's called The Morning with Ernie Bushmiller. It takes place in 1976 when Ernie was 70 and near the end of his career. And Caitlin plays an actress who comes in as his wife and some other characters throughout the show.
So okay. The first thing when I first heard about this, I was like, how, being an artist who works at a drawing table myself, how the hell do you turn the life of a cartoonist into an interesting play? Well,
Well,
I
so
mean,
much of it is, so much of the big laughs are actually, there's a big screen showing Bushmiller art, and so much of the laughs come from just seeing Ernie's drawing. So I think Ernie deserves a writing credit on this play too. It's written by Tom Gammill and Ernie Bushmiller, the more I do the play, the more I'm adding more and more of his artwork because it's just so great. So it's really a way to sort of highlight what he did,
mhm.
and we simulate some drawing and stuff. But yeah, we've been getting a very good response from the shakedown shows we've been doing out here.
And so Caitlin noticed you mentioned your hairstyle. Is that an Ernie Bushmiller do? Is that what she was?
It's trying to. It was. He had a pretty like sort of a. He had a really nice head of hair.
I know, I'm envious.
Really, and then he kept it pretty short on the sides. Yeah.
That's great. That's very exciting. So that's going to happen at Billy Ireland on the 25th, is it?
Yeah. So Nancy Fest, which is the opening for celebration for the exhibit, is the 24th and the 25th. So the exhibit technically opens May 22nd. And Nancy Fest culminates with the play on Saturday night, May 25th at 7 p.m. at the Billy Ireland. And it's quickly selling out. So if anyone who's listening wants to attend, they should get their tickets now.
That's fantastic. And so, Caitlin, is this I have no idea your background if you're a thespian or not. Is this your acting debut?
Yes, very much so. Outside of some high school plays in which I didn't make it past ensemble, but as I told Tom, I think I was in a high school 9th or 10th grade version of Fiddler on the Roof, and I had one line, and it was "hark," and I missed the beat for it. So if that's any indication of my acting abilities,
No, she's great because the Abby and Ernie both had Bronx accents, and Caitlin is from Long Island, so she does a pretty good facsimile of the accent.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay. Whereabouts in Long Island, Caitlin?
I grew up in Comac, so Suffolk County,
Okay.
and I've lived away from there for 13 years now, and in that time have thoroughly tried to like get the accent out of my system, but it comes back very, very easily, especially if I'm tasked to sound a certain way. It's been really fun. I play what, 6 different characters, Tom?
Something like that. Yeah.
So
Gosh.
huge variety. I get to do voices and stuff, and I actually have no interest in theater or acting whatsoever, but really just have a lot of interest in Tom and working with Tom, and this just seemed like something I couldn't not say yes to doing, and it's
Been fun. Yeah, I've been doing it with my daughter Alice and with my niece Camille here in LA. And yeah, everyone has a different style, but they've all been really good.
So, okay, so how did you, Caitlin, I have to ask, how did you get interested or coerced into doing this particular set of roles? I mean, it's like going from, no experience whatsoever, or just one line, and all of a sudden now you're 6 different characters in a that's a lot of pressure.
Right. So Tom and I have known each other for like a decade, probably, or a little bit. No, actually more than that, maybe 14 years. And met when I was the head librarian for the Center for Cartoon Studies in White River Junction, Vermont, and immediately hit it off because I have a Nancy tattoo. It's the only tattoo I have is a Nancy tattoo. And so these are the roles I was born for. And I think I saw Tom at the Rubens, I guess, this past year.
Yeah.
And he, had been working on the play and was telling us about it. And there was no convincing. I asked if I could be part of it, I think. But I think what Tom described as like a walk-on part, like a small walk-on part, then, kind of escalated from there. So
she auditioned, she was great.
So 6 characters. So Tom, are you playing Ernie?
I play Ernie, and then Caitlin comes in and as other characters.
As other characters, and are they characters from the strip? Is that the idea, or characters who are visiting Ernie?
No, you'll have to come see the show.
Okay, it's a secret. Okay, that's wonderful, Brian. I didn't mean to leave you.
You don't know about Ernie's dalliance with the porn star back in the 70s?
Okay. Is that part of the catch and kill? Did somebody for Ernie?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
People are going to want to see that for sure, right?
Sure, absolutely. The wildlife of Ernie Bushmiller. So, Brian, you're part of this too, but you're not in the play. How is it that you're not in the play, Brian?
Well, I'm a worse actor than either of them by far. So,
Brian, you've been in some I Learned to Draw videos. You've been great.
Yeah, no, I got sucked into one of Tom's major performances that we did at the Rubens one year. That was about the chapter wars between the various National Cartoon Society has chapters in different parts of the country.
Right.
And I'm in the Connecticut chapter. He's in the LA chapter. And, it was kind of a West Side Story thing. It was like a gang war between the various chapters. And it was live on stage with music and everything. And it was, I had the soundtrack of that on my iTunes playlist. And my wife and I were driving around in the car and it suddenly came on. And she said, "This is fantastic,"
That was a Memphis Rubens, right?
I forget when it was. The Rubens kind of blend together for me, but yeah, it was really fun. But my wife loves karaoke, and I have a problem with karaoke for 2 reasons: the singing and the waiting. I don't like either of them.
Well, so Brian, your contribution then is not on the stage, but then it's in the exhibition, right? It's
Yes.
up. So there's an exhibition for folks who don't know that's up from May. I guess Caitlin said just before May 25th, May 22nd or 23rd.
Yeah, it's May 22nd to November 5th, is it? I believe.
Okay.
November 3rd. May 22nd to November 3rd.
Right. And so the exhibition is called The Nancy Show. And it's not all just Ernie Bushmiller. It's a wider ranging exhibition than just a retrospective.
Yeah. So I'm the curator of all that. And I proposed this idea to the exhibition committee a couple of years ago, with a bunch of other ideas. And, I actually did a Nancy exhibit at the Museum of Cartoon Art in 1990. So
He really just started the whole thing with this book in 1988.
yeah. And yeah, I guess I'm sort of the OG of the Nancy thing. Not really, but I was inspired by other people, obviously. But so originally it was just going to be one gallery, and it was going to be, almost exclusively devoted to Bushmiller's work. And of course, Tom has this fabulous collection of hundreds of originals and all kinds of artifacts and photos and toys and everything else. And so we're borrowing heavily from his collection. But then I guess there was a change of schedule at the Billy Ireland and the other gallery. They have sort of two large galleries that they use for the rotating exhibits. So I said, well, that's great news. What are we going to do in the other gallery? And we came up with this idea of Beyond Bushmiller, which would probably have gotten a little bit shortchanged in the original layout. But so we're including people like, Andy Warhol and Joe Brainerd and Patrick McDonald, who does some Nancy paintings, and Mark Newgarden from Raw Magazine, and Bill 36 pages from Bill Griffith's new graphic biography of Ernie Bushmiller. All the different artists that continued Nancy after Ernie died, including Mark Lasky, Jerry Scott, Guy and Brad Gilchrist, Olivia James, who's doing it now.
Right.
So that kind of opened up a whole new dimension for the show, and it makes it feel a little more contemporary, I think.
Well, it's interesting. So it's not just comics in this second gallery. We're also talking about Warhol paintings and prints, and Patrick McDonald paintings.
Yeah, some abstract art and Mad Magazine parodies.
Oh, fantastic!
All kinds of stuff. We've got a really amazing 3-page story that's quite surreal by Howard Cruz, underground cartoonist.
Sure.
So there's all kinds of little goodies in that room.
Wow. And so I guess one of the questions that comes to mind to me is like, okay, why Nancy? Why now? What is it about Nancy that is hitting such a chord? And it seems to be, it's a big thing now. I mean, why Nancy? Why now?
I think she's having a moment. I was absolutely blown away last week or a couple of weeks ago, and Art Forum magazine featured this huge article about.
Oh, I got to get that.
About Nancy. It mentioned our exhibit and the book, various books and things like that, and that it almost kind of puts a seal of approval on the whole effort, really. That somebody else out there other than us Nancy nerds, and the Nancy nerds are all involved in this exhibit in many different ways.
But I think a lot of credit goes to the Billy Ireland Cartoon Museum for saying, yeah, let's do this, because no other museum has wanted to do this up to this point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for us, I can say just a little bit, we're the largest collection of comics and cartoon art in the world, but a huge chunk of that, the numbers that make us the largest, came from the International Museum of Cartoon Art, which is where Brian had curated that original Nancy show from, and his family had ran for decades. And so Brian, ever since we moved into our new building 10 years ago now, has curated exhibits for us every couple of years. And I think this was one, Brian, that you had been talking about wanting to do for a while. And we were just looking for the right time. and the time is now. Nancy is, yeah, I mean, as Brian said, like, it seems like she's having a comeback. I think Olivia James really did kind of introduce it to a new audience and you know, revive it in certain ways to a new generation. And there's just so much to show, like, right, when Brian, when you start digging into all the stuff that we were going to put in the And Beyond exhibit,
Yeah, keeps
almost
growing.
just keeps growing and growing.
I
Like
find
Nancy
stuff every day.
referenced, we could have a whole wall dedicated to people's Nancy tattoos, let alone to the abstract paintings and the punk zines and the parodies that date back for years. So it just seemed like, why not now is the question.
My son who's a filmmaker is actually making a documentary about all of this. And he's just, you know, a couple of years ago, he would say to me, like, what is the deal with Nancy, Dad? You know, I don't get it, you know. And I gave him a whole stack of books, and he took them back to his apartment in Boston. He came back and said, you know, this would make a good documentary. He's made a number of other documentaries. And so he's been going around filming all these various characters. We went to Tom Gammill's house out in Altadena and spent a day filming out there in his collection. And we went to Bill Griffith's studio up in Connecticut, up in the woods, and filmed him scratching away at his drawing board. And
I heard he's going to see, you guys are going to see Dennis Kitchen. That's
yeah,
great.
we're going to meet with Dennis Kitchen, talk about the secret Bushmiller Society. And it's amazing how many kind of different levels and aspects of this thing, different ways that people approach it and interpret Bushmiller's work, appreciate it on so many different levels. You know, it's the deeper you get into it, the more you realize how expansive it is, really. I mean, I think it was Tom introduced me to a Facebook group called How to Read Nancy Facebook.
Yeah. That was created by the How to Read Nancy book guys, I think.
Yeah,
And these
Newgarden.
guys are just posting constantly all day long, like weird stuff and interesting strips. And I've actually posted things there that we're trying to identify, you know, is this the first appearance of Nancy in the Sunday comics? And like within like 10 minutes, these guys are on it. You know, they've got examples of it. We had a Sunday page that Tom had where some of the panels were cut out of it.
Yeah, Ernie used to, like, it was from Ernie's collection. He cut out panels and either to like play around with them or stick them into other strips.
And I posted that on this Facebook page, and within less than like 5 minutes, somebody had the whole page with the missing panels in it. You know,
Oh, that's great.
it's just you know, so there's a lot more Nancy nuts out there than we haven't had any idea of. You know.
And there's one guy who's still alive, Jim Carlson, who is Ernie's friend, and he's been a good resource for all of us. And
Well,
actually, my wife was talking to him yesterday, and he pointed out that Ernie is more famous now than he was when he was alive.
Right.
yeah, it seems to be the case. I just finished Bill Griffith's book,
Oh yeah,
Three Rocks, the story of Ernie Bushmiller, and Jim Carlson is a source for that, and he details that in there. It's fascinating. I guess it sounds like Jim Carlson was just like a kid who showed up the door one day with whatever, I don't know if he was a paper boy or something, but he showed up, and then he ends up talking to Ernie Bushmiller, and then it becomes a lifelong kind of friendship.
yeah.
You know, extraordinary, really. But there seems to be something about Nancy that inspires an enormous amount of obsession in its aficionados, as it were. I mean, Tom, what inspired you to begin collecting all of this material about Nancy, and when did you start?
Well, I went to this auction in 1983. It was at the Armory. Brian, were you at that auction? It was
Guernseys, right?
Yeah. And I went without any. I thought it was in by a Blondie Sunday page, and I could get 20 Bushmillers dailies for $5 each. So I got those, and I also got the self-portrait. He did his famous self-portrait. Who's got a gag for me today? And I took him home, and my girlfriend, my now wife Sandy, I was like, hey, do you mind if we frame these and hang them up? And it cost more to frame than it did to buy the originals. And,
Not anymore though, right?
Yeah,
not
not
really.
anymore.
So I just so then after that I said, like, because for a long time you could get the originals really cheap for like $30, and then they went up to $100 because at the time all the comic art critics like Bill Blackbeard were and Maurice Horn were like ignoring Ernie, and so you could get originals for Bushmillers for really cheap, and
Oh,
everyone else was buying the Crazy Cats and all and Little Nemos and stuff like that.
sure.
And so I was just sort of quietly getting some, but there were other people too, Eddie Gorodetsky, and of course Mark Newgarden, and there was several people who knew they had something because
Yeah.
and like Ernie Bushmiller, he was a great artist, and he did some really funny strips. In the later years, in the 70s, when it was more assistants and they were recycling stuff. If you only know his stuff based from the later years, you could see what's the big deal. But you see some of the stuff he did in his heyday in the 50s and the 40s and even the 60s. You see, I mean, he's as funny as any cartoonist out there.
I was thinking just recently, I called my good friend David Stanford, who was the editor at Henry Holt. And I met him through Gary Trudeau. He was Gary Trudeau's editor. He was editor for Charles Schultz and Jeff McNally. And I did about 3 or 4 books with him. And he called me up probably around right before I did the book, 87, 88. And he said, United Features Syndicate wants to do a Nancy book. And I said, why would you ask me? I hate that strip. It's stupid, it's dumb. Who else reads that? Old ladies and little kids, And he said, well, that's exactly why I want you to do it, I said, really? So I started on this book, and I started meeting all these people, including Mark Newgarden, Paul Karasek. I met working on that project with them. I think I'd met Bill Griffith before, but I got to know him, and certainly Art Spiegelman and Jerry Moriarty and all the sort of underground people in New York. And Jim Carlson, who was introduced to me by a lawyer friend. It goes on and on like that. I think the first time I met Tom Gammill, the first words out of his mouth were, Brian, I have all your books, but my favorite one is this Ernie Bushmiller Nancy book. That's the first time I ever met Tom. That's what he said to me.
It's a great book.
And it just continues, they're just personal connections and people that I know through Nancy, through that connection. It's kind of interesting to trace it all back to the beginning.
And
Caitlin, how did you first get interested?
I mean, so obviously, Nancy is a little bit before my time, the Bushmiller Nancy, but I got interested when I first I think probably when I was in college and started picking up a lot of old collections of comics, and Brian's book in particular was the one that introduced me to it. Like, I'd been aware of Nancy, but hadn't really been vetted in the, steeped in the full history of Bushmiller's version of it before then. So it was really through Brian's book. And I think when I got my degree in library science and I decided I'm going to attempt to be a comics librarian, it did not seem like it was a path that was ever going to actually work out. And now I work at like I said, the world's largest one, which I'm thrilled by. But a year or two into this career trajectory, when I was still in Vermont, or right before I left New York to go to Vermont, and I sort of decided to dedicate my life to this, I felt like Nancy's face was like the perfect icon or brand for like that I could brand myself with to dedicate my life to comics, which is why I ended up getting that tattoo. And it just became like a symbolic thing to me for, my favorite comic strip. And I think part of what I love about it is I find it very soothing, weirdly. Like, the simplicity of it, I think, is really like just extremely soothing to look at. It's so straightforward. There's nothing that requires like a deep level of interpretation. I think sometimes like we can get pushed too far in the direction of like, comics aren't for kids, and comics should be taken seriously, and comics should be about very complex, difficult topics. And it's really nice sometimes to take a breather with Nancy and just enjoy comics for comics' sake. And, no one really did it any better than he could. So the design alone is just like weirdly pleasant to take in. So
Yeah. I mean, just look at, I was out there about a month ago, laying the exhibit out, and Tom's artwork had arrived, and we were looking through it, and it's going to be spectacular, to have an entire gallery of framed Bushmiller originals, and they're just beautiful to look at because they're so precise. They have a quality to them, to see the originals in particular.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously because they're bigger, and you can see all the little pen scratches and paper texture and stuff. There's not a lot of mistakes on them. I mean, some originals have white out on them, and rough edges and scratches and things like that. They're pretty clean,
Yeah.
But they're just beautiful to look at, and they're all funny.
That is one of the things about the consistency of the humor in Nancy is pretty amazing. The consistency in terms of, okay, the simplicity, but also the clever self-referential quality that exists in Nancy is very consistent all the way, particularly in the last, well, from the 50s on, I suppose. But it's interesting to you're talking about the original artwork, and I was thinking about that. There's a great segment in Three Rocks by Bill Griffith where he talks about Al Plastino, who was one of Bushmiller's assistants at one point in time, and he talks about what a taskmaster Bushmiller was. Literally 69 spikes on Nancy's hair, down to that. And I'm surprised, but also amazed, really, to hear that the original artwork is not marked up all that much, because it is so absolutely precise. The strips, that as you see them printed, they're so clean, and so you would think there would have to be a lot of editing that goes on before he got to that point. But I suppose he did it over the course of many years. So
yeah. Well, I think one of the things that Tom's going to get into a little bit is his working methods, because he had multiple drawing boards. I mean, how many were there? 4 of them, I think.
He would work on 4 strips at the same time.
And on different drawing boards.
Yeah,
and
so it would allow the ink to dry, and he said it kept him from getting bored.
And he also worked backwards. He would do what he called the snapper panel first, and then work backwards from there. Sometimes if you look at the final panel and realize that he did that, and they're just often very visual, you say, that is just weird. It's almost surreal at times. And how did he get there? And then you read it back to the beginning, and you realize,
and that could be
complicated.
And it could be sort of it could be a crazy setup too, where he knew what the funny picture was, and he only had 3 panels to get there. And it can be sometimes a little convoluted to the setup. Like there's one where Sligo has a stitch in his head because the last panel has him in the window of an embroidery shop. But nobody has time to go like, oh my God, Sligo, how do you get a stitch in your head? They're just like, hello, Sligo, I see you have a stitch in your head. Right. So sort of like so the archness of it can be very entertaining too.
I almost wonder how often, if ever, he came up with snappers that he could not figure out a path to. I mean, that had to happen sometimes, because some of them are just so totally absurd that it's shocking that he ever found a way there.
And one of his things was, he said comics are a visual medium. He always wanted that last panel to be a funny picture. And he really did do very few puns because I was looking to see how many puns he did. And there's one in the How to Read Nancy book, but he really did try to make that last. He did very few that the punchline was just a verbal joke or a pun.
Hey, Geoff here, taking a moment to stretch and grab a quick refreshment, and to tell you how you can become a contributor to this podcast by joining us at patreon.com/Geoff Grogan. Naturally, production of this podcast is not without its costs, and by joining us at the paid level, you'll ensure that I'll be able to bring you great interviews and discussions with top-notch comics creators on a regular basis. And if you join at the paid level anytime between now and June 1st, you'll receive a free copy of Donut and the Cheeseburger, Race for the White House, mailed directly to your door. So join us, won't you? That's patreon.com/Geoff Grogan. And now, back to the show.
Yeah, I mean, syndicated cartoonists doing a daily strip 365 days a year don't have much time to mess around and try different ideas, you know. And I would assume that Ernie got so good at going through that process of coming up with the snapper and then working it back into a gag that he probably was, you know, just always charging forward and doing one after another. And he got good at it. He was good at it, you know.
Yeah, obviously he got into a rhythm early on and then just continued it through his career. It's really interesting, those last panels that you're talking about. A lot of them are so literally, I mean, they could have been done by Rene Magritte. They could have been done by Dali or one of the Dadaists or something like that. They have that quality. They're so out of this world crazy. I'm thinking,
And yet he made fun of those guys.
I know, right? Right? Yeah. I mean, he thought they were probably, I mean, the way it reads in some of the stuff I've read, he thought they were pretty highfalutin and kind of whacked out, but he was pretty whacked out himself when you think about it.
You have this, this is like, these were the end papers in my book.
Oh my gosh.
And what I did was I went through all the strips that we had in the Museum of Cartoon Art exhibit and cut out all the snapper panels and just pasted them together in kind of almost like a wallpaper pattern.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And each one of these is you know, there are words in these, but there are really no speech balloons in any of them. And we also, for this exhibit, we did this is a new book that we put out with Pete Maresca, which hopefully there'll be some copies available at the opening, because we started working on this book in October and we already have copies in hand, but
It looks beautiful.
Yeah. It'll be available at the opening, and it's also already available for pre-order. So
And that contains Bushmiller work and work by Olivia James and others as well.
well, it's mostly original art from Tom and other lenders' collections.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's Sunday pages, color,
Mm-hmm.
which is that these have never been collected in a book before. A lot of people have done the daily strips, but not the Sundays. And then in the back, we sort of cover the the post Bushmiller era. But
That gives us an idea what the show is about.
that was a thrill that we got that book out. It was quite a Tom ended up driving all of his original art from Southern California to Northern California. And Pete scanned everything, and then Tom turned around and went home.
Tom, how many strips?
It was a long day.
How many strips is it that you have in your collection?
I don't know. I think about over 100. I think it seems like I loaned a bunch of about 100 to the museum, right? And then
I think there's about 80 or so.
Yeah. So
There we
probably
go.
close to 200 or something. I can't afford them anymore, but I enjoy the ones that I have.
And so, Brian, how did you pick and choose from them and from other collections, or did you just take everything Tom gave you verbatim, or did you find some things worked with other things better? How was that process?
Well, I went to Tom's house in July after San Diego Comic-Con. And he had all his, some of his strips are framed on the walls in his dining room, which is also the Ernie Bushmiller Cartoon Library and Museum. But he had a lot of them in these portfolio books with, clear sleeves in them.
Mm-hmm.
While my son was interviewing Tom, I was flipping through these books and putting Post-it notes. And saying, "Ah, this is a good one," and then Tom and I went through them after that, and so it was just kind of a visual, if looking at all that many pieces, and I think Tom has a lot more than 100. I think he's being modest. I think he's got a couple hundred,
No, I don't know.
but it was
You got some,
something that just grabs your eye,
you got some great examples from Mark Newgarden and Patrick
Yeah.
in
Yeah,
the
we
show.
borrowed from a few other lenders,
Mhm.
and some from the Billy Ireland collection as well, obviously. But having done a book and another exhibit before, I have things that I kind of look out for, the relationship between Nancy and Sluggo, or ones that are particularly glamorous Fritzy Ritz episodes, or just surreal stuff that he would do on occasion. There was some repetition. He would reuse
Oh,
the
yeah.
same gag or the same prop. I mean, could do a whole exhibit of plunger gags, probably, or at least a wall.
So, Caitlin, what's going on at Ohio now? In Ohio now?
Well, we're just getting ready for Nancy Fest. So we're in the process of framing everything for the exhibit. Brian and I have been working together on some of the label content, and we'll be getting it ready to open in May. I just finished getting together all the merchandise that's going to come with the VIP swag bags for anyone who registers. So there's going to be some fun, like, bonus material there, including wrapping paper, Nancy related wrapping, or Nancy wrapping paper that Peter Maresca, I think, designed. So yeah, we're just getting everything in place for our big debut, which is exactly 1 month from today.
Yeah.
Nancy
Wow.
Fest. Yeah.
How long does it take to actually install the exhibition?
We usually, to do the actual physical install, is usually 2 to 3 weeks between our shows. So, we try to do as much of the matting and framing in advance, and try to, get a final checklist usually up to 6 months in advance. But we're a very small staff, and especially with a show like this where there's so many people involved, like the vast majority of it is loaned. I think, I don't know, maybe 10% of it came from the Billy Ireland's actual collections. That just makes for more moving parts and kind of pushes the timeline further back. But the exhibits that we currently have on display close on May 5th, and then we're going to be diving right into getting Nancy set up.
Wow. That's when you think about how big the show is, that's not a lot of time.
It's not, no.
Yeah, and the framing is something that you don't do in-house. Do you send that out?
We do it in-house. Yeah, we
You
do all
it
the
in-house.
in-house. And so that's why, yeah, that's part of why, and we make all the labels in-house and everything. So just about the only thing we don't do in-house is the vinyls for the wall. And there's going to be some really awesome, gigantic wall graphics in this exhibit. So, and other surprises. I don't know how much we want to give away, Brian, but there's going to be some cool, physical big objects, sculptural objects and stuff in the show. So yeah,
It'll be like walking into Bushmiller land.
Wonderful.
Exactly.
Wonderful.
Sort of like Disney World. Yeah.
One of the wonderful things about Bushmiller's art, and something that I think he was keenly aware of, at least from what I've read, is that it works on a microscopic level, but it's so simplistic it could also work on a mural size level. The use of black, the simplistic line work, all of those things can translate. I mean, because his lines were so strong, his use of blacks and flat black was so strong. You can imagine how the impact of that on a large scale has got to be really, really wonderful to see, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, to be enveloped by Nancy is imagining him walking in and being overwhelmed. But there's a couple of things that come to mind while we're talking. One of the things, Brian, I'm really glad that you're here, but I'm wondering if you note any connections between the way that Bushmiller honed his art. Do you see any connections between that and the way that your father worked on Beetle Bailey? Because Beetle Bailey also, when it reaches its mature state, really has, in terms of artwork, is very iconic in much the same way that Nancy can be. In the, the way that your father developed in Beetle Bailey and High and Lows and elsewhere, very, repetitive but also simplistic forms that almost seem to distill the essence of cartooning down to some very elemental forms. Do you see any connection there? Did your father ever talk about Bushmiller, or was Bushmiller an influence?
Oh, definitely. He, so they lived in adjacent towns.
Mm-hmm.
Ernie Bushmiller lived in Stamford, Connecticut, and we lived in Greenwich, Connecticut. So they're right next door to each other. But Bushmiller wasn't part of that sort of Connecticut cartoonist group that evolved in the 60s and 70s with Stan Drake and Leonard Starr and Bill Yates and Jack Tippett and all those guys who would go out and play golf, and they had a bowling league and all kinds of fun stuff. But Ernie didn't participate in really much of that. I did meet him once when the Museum of Cartoon Art first opened in 1974. And he came over, and Jack and Mort took him out to lunch, and I shook his hand, and that was about it. I wish I'd really gotten a chance to hang out with him a little bit, but he was pretty old by that point.
Mm-hmm.
But my father told me that Ernie.
I think you're older than he was now. I think you're older now than he was then. That's what...
My father said at one point Ernie gave him some kind of paternal advice. He patted him on the shoulder and just said, "Just remember, Mort, you got to dumb it down, dumb it down." So, Mort remembered him actually saying that to him in that exact way. And I do think that, for my father, when I started writing gags with him in the 80s, he was just like, funny pictures, there's too much talking here, it's just two heads talking. I want funny pictures. And so he was always goading us into doing more visual humor and more kind of slapstick stuff with Beetle Bailey, where he's beaten up into little pieces on the ground, or some of the visual tropes that you found in Beetle Bailey. And he was definitely influenced by Ernie Bushmiller. I mean, I think of Ernie Bushmiller, certainly not the first cartoonist to do a kind of a gag a day formula, but I think he was really one of the pioneers of that, and really establishing it. In my father came from the sort of magazine gags world, where Charles Schultz and Hank Ketchum and Bill Keane and Johnny Hart, that's where all those guys, got their early experience doing single panel gag cartoons for the Saturday Evening Post or for Collier or True or one of these national men's magazines. So they had sort of trained themselves in that gag formula. Ernie really showed how that could be done in a comic strip on a daily basis.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned Johnny Hart. I was thinking about him the other day as well in regard to Bushmiller. And now that I think of it, a lot of, you can find connections back to Bushmiller through all of those cartoonists, the strip cartoonists doing gag-a-day strips in the 60s, the late 50s, the 60s, the 70s. Maybe not Peanuts, but certainly Johnny Hart, no question, and Mort Walker and others as well. You can see that. You can trace that approach to what Bushmiller did over the course of his life and in Nancy. It's pretty interesting once you begin to think about it. I hadn't really ever made those connections before, but having sort of delved into Nancy a little bit more, I can see them all over the place now.
Yeah. I mean, Ernie was very well respected among the cartoonists. He was one of the founders of the National Cartoonist Society. And even though he wasn't, one of the sort of, good old boy kind of inner circle, with Rube Goldberg and Milton Caniff and stuff, I mean, he definitely knew those guys and they respected him. And, the sort of the lack of respect, I think Ernie, experienced was more for, I would say, critics and people that took themselves seriously. Like, this is really just for children. It's not to be taken seriously, really. It's
Yeah, especially like in the 70s when it was like comics being relevant, like Doonesbury and stuff like that, Kathy and stuff, and go for more realism and stuff. Because also, I mean, like the best Bushmiller art is sort of in that weird limbo land of the 1940s. Brian, did you say it was sort of like Edward Hopper or Bill Griffith said that? It's just sort of like this weird, dreamy world wasn't really tied to the 1970s.
Yeah. I think that what is really interesting, and this is one of the things I know that my son wants to really delve into in his documentary, is so you have probably some of the most knowledgeable people in the world of comics scholarship and appreciation. People like Art Spiegelman and Dennis Kitchen and Bill Griffith and Mark Newgard and Paul Karasik, and people that come from a fairly sophisticated approach, have embraced Bushmiller and Nancy as kind of like the ultimate comic, And so at the same time, you have the sort of general public not appreciating it so much. One of the ideas that we tossed around was like, let's go to the Museum of Modern Art and see if we can convince them to do a Nancy show there or something like that. And then just see what they say when they turn us down, But I don't think it's.
I remember when I first met Gary Trudeau, who draws Doonesbury, I said, like, it's my favorite cartoonist, Ernie Bushmiller. And he looked like I punched him in the stomach. He couldn't believe it.
Well, yeah. You can see, I mean, it's interesting you mentioned that because you can see how that could be the case in the case of Gary Trudeau, right? Particularly where he was coming from when he first started. The kind of fine editing that went into and streamlining that went into Bushmiller's work was exactly, and the antithesis in a lot of ways of the wordiness and the emphasis on text that shows up in Doonesbury's work.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, whenever I mention Nancy to Gary, he just kind of looks the other way. I don't want to, I'm not going there.
Well, I was a comics reading kid in the late 60s and the 70s. And, I have to attest to the fact that it took me a long time to come around to Nancy because I grew up influenced and interested in the stuff Doonesbury was doing and Breathed was doing in the 80s and all of that kind of stuff, which, again, seemed to reject that idea of the gag a day or the straightforward gag a day. But as time goes on and you reinvestigate it, and obviously some people were clued into it like you, Tom, right from the beginning, Nancy's almost like a lexicon of what it takes to make a great comic strip, what it takes to make a comic strip that functions. And this is how a comic strip functions. Bill Griffiths.
And there are some terrible strips too, but it's like Jerry Lewis. It's like Jerry Lewis did some terrible stuff, but he did some brilliant stuff too.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Well, yeah, you can't hit a home run every time, right?
Yeah. But I think later on when Ernie was relying more on like the assistants and stuff, I mean, if you just see some of that stuff from the 70s, you could go like, "Oh, brother, what is all the hoopla about?"
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's Bill Griffith told me this summer when we were at San Diego together. He said, the thing that's good about your book is it really is the best of Ernie Bushmiller's Nancy. So you took, different periods of his career. I mean, there's some early Fritzy Rich stuff in there and the Nancy stuff. But the bulk of the book is just curated and selected as the best gags and the best drawn strips and not repetitive ones, And Bill said, if somebody were to publish the complete Nancy, in how many volumes would that be? It'd be like Peanuts or something where there's 30 volumes of endless, Nancy strips. He said, you'd probably come away and say, yeah, that was a pretty good strip. And it wasn't always great, it could actually be mediocre at times. But when you look at the best of his work, it really stands out, I think. As being...
in writing this play, I've come across some strips from the 50s I'd never seen because most of the reprints are from the 40s. And there's some great ones in the 50s and 60s that that somebody needs to do. Brian, you need to put those together in a book.
Well, part of Bill Griffith's story that you read in The Three Rocks is this sort of aha moment when he sent away on eBay for this scrapbook.
Right, yeah.
And somebody had pasted these strips in there neatly, and they're not arranged in chronological. I've seen the scrapbook. I mean, it's a focal point of the documentary, actually. And they're from like the 1960s. And, I mean, I always thought the 40s, that's when Bushmiller was really at his peak. That's when he did some of the most wonderfully surreal strips and everything.
And also, I mean, he had the space in the newspaper. He had more room then. And
Yeah.
you could tell he was doing more of the drawing himself. So yeah, from an art point of view, I think the 40s is still the best.
But Bill Griffith would argue the 60s. That's when he really, everything just kind of gelled, and he got it down to his basics, and the characters look exactly like you always will remember them to look. And, Mark and Paul wrote a really like a kind of a add-on essay in our catalog about how to read Nancy's face. And I'm not even going to try to explain it because it's a deep dive, into how her face changed and everything. But in their take, Nancy reached the sort of the ultimate iconic face that she had was more like in the 60s than it was in the 40s.
Oh, that's interesting.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I mean,
I think David's documentary is going to be great. He's getting some great people together.
Yeah, no, it's I think it's one of these things, the more he gets into it, the more different alleyways he goes down.
Yeah.
He's talking to some film production companies in Los Angeles, and he's got a couple well-known people who have shown a lot of interest in it, and who knows where it's going to go.
do you have any? Oh, I'm sorry.
With the memes and stuff now, I mean, there's much more. Like I've had some young animators come to the play the last couple of weeks, who are into Nancy from memes and stuff.
Wow, that's crazy.
And Bill Griffith teaches a class at School of Visual Arts and has for many years, and so he's got like college-age kids in his class. And he says, these kids don't know anything about George Harriman or Winsor McKay, and some of them don't even know who Robert Crumb is.
Oh, sure.
And he does a whole unit on Nancy, and they had a girl in his class, and she said, Nancy was a comic strip? And he said, you said you knew who she was. And he said, well, but I had her on a T-shirt, I didn't know she was a comic strip.
So I've done about 10 of these practice shows at my house. My house can fit 22 people, and 8 of them have gone great, and 2 have not gone great. And I can tell the very opening graphic, as you know, Caitlin, is today's show is sponsored by Blob's Cheese, and it's an Ernie Bushmiller picture of a highway billboard with a big cheese, Ernie Bushmiller drawing of a piece of cheese, and it says Blob's Cheese. And then there's a mouse sitting on a rock looking at the billboard, and then there's Sluggo looking at the mouse with a Ernie Bushmiller sightline. And if you're into Bushmiller, you see that and you just instantly laugh. And 8 of the 10 shows, the audience goes wild, and it's going to be fine. But 2 of the shows, you just hear people going like, Blob's Cheese, I've never heard of that.
They still make it?
It's a tougher hour. It's like I win them over, but it takes longer than the people who think Blob's Cheese. I almost was tempted, because one of the audiences was like neighbors who all know me, but they don't really know Ernie Bushmiller. I just wanted to come out and not do the show, just explain why that picture of Blob's Cheese was funny. But I know in Ohio, at the Nancy Fest, you show that picture of Blob's Cheese, it's going to bring down the house.
Yeah,
People are going to love it. It's going to be, I have to say, I'm just so excited for it, in part because of all the great people that are coming, but it's just going to be an incredibly joyful event. And even when we were doing the layout for the exhibit, just walking around, like, this is just going to make people so happy. It's so uncomplicated, despite how complex, I guess, his precision of the design of everything was. The uncomplicatedness of it all is deeply pleasant. And I think
Yeah.
everything we've got planned for this, and especially Tom's play, is just gonna, yeah, people are gonna love it.
And David's going to be there to capture it all for the documentary.
Oh yeah,
right?
no, he's
Yeah.
filming everything. But I think I remember before, I had submitted a whole bunch list of ideas to the exhibit committee out there, and I was talking with Jenny, and she said, "Well, we're doing an exhibit, on political journalism, cartooning, kind of like serious topics, of how important cartooning is and how it's evolved, and different voices and different types of artists coming into the field and everything." And I'm just like, and I think Nancy is kind of like a breath of fresh air, not a fresh air, but something different, completely different, as a sort of sort of comic relief in the middle of a time that there's a lot of serious stuff going on.
I agree. And the first exhibit that Brian did for us after the pandemic was actually one that he has the banner of in the background there, the dog show. And that was the focus: dogs in cartoons and comics. Like, just keep it real simple. We weren't looking at, portrayals of Vietnam through political cartoons or anything like that. And I just think that sometimes that's really refreshing and necessary.
Yeah,
Nancy's like the peanut butter and jelly sandwich of comics. Like, even if you're a foodie, sometimes you just want
that's what we're serving at the opening, right?
We are serving Nancy's favorite foods. So we're going to have hot dogs and ice cream and, some other surprises.
I've been really pushing for like a big bowl of spaghetti in the middle, but they said that's going to be too messy.
I couldn't figure out how to make a big bowl of spaghetti work with 300 people. So yeah.
It would have to be a Bushmiller bowl of spaghetti, right? With meatballs too.
Have to eat it with your hands.
Or as he had Sluggo eating spaghetti with a funnel. So Ernie loved hot dogs. He made all his business deals at Nedick's in Times Square.
Yep. Yeah, we're definitely having a hot dog buffet and ice cream sundae station too.
Oh wow.
Oh, great. Yeah, when I started working on the original 1988 book, I was connecting with different people. There were different connections that somebody would tell me about. Like Jerry Moriarty was a professor at School of Visual Arts, and he was really the original Nancy guru. I went to his loft studio in downtown Manhattan, and he had the most incredible collection of original strips. But somebody told me that Michael Frith, who was the art director at Henson Association, was a big Nancy fan.
Yeah, definitely.
I actually had a meeting with him because we did an exhibit called The Art of the Muppets.
Mm-hmm.
I went into his office, and they used to, I forget, it was 60th in East Side, and it was the Muppet building. You go in there, and they have puppets all over the place. And it was like an amazing office building. And I go up there, this guy's number 2 under Jim Henson, and they go in his office, and he's got Nancy originals all around the walls of his office, and he could have anything he wanted in there. He was the art director. And I said, "What's the deal with Nancy?" And he said, "I don't know. It's just a strip that's been around that long, and it was never funny. It was never once was it ever funny."
Wow.
Really? I thought it was pretty funny. He said, "Well, no, I'm talking about like laugh out loud funny. It's what it is." He said, "I love it, And I started looking at it. I said, "Well, this is spaghetti and ice cream." He said, "Yeah, it's Nancy and food. That's my thing." So all of his originals had something to do with.
Oh wow.
Well, for all of its straightforward simplicity, there's something about the strip that I find maybe I'm an outlier here, but I kind of find it, for all of its simplicity, deeply intellectual, in the sense that it's always about the mechanics of making a comic strip. It's always exploring the idea: how do we get a gag in here? How do we make this work? What are the tools that are being used to do this? And the more I read of it, the more it seems to me that's, you can see the wheels turning in Bushmiller's head. And I think that's one of the things that I enjoy most as a cartoonist looking at it, is that I see what he's doing, and it's really brilliant. It's really smart. It's really funny. It's very clever. How does he do that day after day after day? You know?
Yeah, I totally agree. That's really a good explanation. And if somebody says, I don't know, I don't think it's funny, I don't know what to say to them. It's like, okay, well, that's your opinion. I feel
Yeah.
bad for
But it's so smart and it's so funny. You know, that's the thing. It's like, yeah, maybe it's not laugh out loud funny, but man, it's really smart and it's really
Clever.
weird and clever. Yeah. And there's
Yeah.
some really great weird stuff in there.
It's
you know,
also just it's pure cartooning, you know.
exactly.
It doesn't aspire to be anything more or less than that. You know,
Yeah.
it's just a comic strip that works on the page.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
really
and,
well
you know,
figured out.
and it's funny sometimes just for its laziness, or like, you know, like rather than having to show a lady talking on the phone too long, he just writes blah, 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 etc.
It reminds you though of how smart good cartooning is. You know what I mean? It's like in the fact that sometimes it is just, you know, a knockoff that you can ignore. You can read it and go on about your business the way the Bushmiller assumed you would. You'd read it, you'd go on to the other pages and read the deep stuff about politics or whatever. And it's just meant to take up that second, but in its simplicity, it also reminds you how smart and tricky cartooning on that level is. Did you know I may be a podcast host by day, but by night I don cape and cowl and with iPad pencil in hand draw my butt off on all kinds of comics projects and art. And you can check out my work, my handiwork, and even buy it at etsy.com/shop/comicsprintworks. That's etsy.com/shop/comicsprintworks. Okay, I don't really wear cape and cowl while I'm drawing, but you get the idea. That's etsy.com/shop/comicsprintworks.
It's really just like it's like great engineering, you know?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if the machine works really well, you don't really have to think about how it's working or why, it's just working. And I
Yeah.
feel like that's what that strip does, you know? Like we know. So first of all, I want to say I feel like for me personally, and I'm sure for you guys too, it really says a lot about a person if you find out that they like Nancy a lot. Like I feel like it changes the respect I have for the person in a positive way, because it's like they get it. Like they understand that, oh, this wasn't something, it's not simple because it's tossed off. It's simple because he mastered it.
Yes.
So that it looks effortless and tossed off, and that you can just get to the gag. And you know, what was that Wally Wood quote? Like it takes less time to read Nancy than it does not
It's
to.
it's harder to not read Nancy than to read Nancy.
Yeah, yeah. But it's like, and it's interesting because that also says a lot about Bushmiller to me. Like he wasn't a show off. He wasn't trying to like show that he could, you know, do some incredibly profound thing. He was just like I don't know. There's something very like blue collar about it, like just getting the job done. So
He wasn't, you know, he was a pretty sophisticated guy. You know, he was a screenwriter for Harold Lloyd back in the 30s. According to Jim Carlson, you know, he had a library of great literature and
right.
you know, had good taste in art and music.
Yeah.
You know, he wasn't a dumb guy, you know.
Not in the slightest. And so that's why it's kind of, I don't know, funny to me when people think that that's just this simple thing. And those of us who know better know that like it takes a lot to get there.
We're in the cult, you know.
Yeah.
Here's one that's not in the exhibit. Now look at that
Oh.
last snapper. It's like Sluggos gets tired playing with a pinwheel, so he has it up to an
That's
old
fantastic.
Now,
That's
if you
so
tried-
fantastic.
If you tried to do that in any other medium, like it would just be like, oh, get that little boy away from. But it works in this context, I think.
It's brilliant. It's wonderful.
You can really only do this in a comic strip.
That's
Yeah.
true. Yep.
Yeah, but you think it's so, you know, even the character of that bum is sort of like, I don't know, you know,
Very Bushmiller.
you look at like, who is that? And you know what? There's nothing realistic about it. You know, is that like a guy that you would see in the Depression sometime, or
I mean, think about it too long. It's just you think about it too long. It's kind of depressing, but it's like Ernie didn't want you to spend too much time. It's like
yeah,
he solved a puzzle.
Well, you know, one of the things you said there, Tom, was it could only happen in a comic strip. And I think a lot of what's great about Bushmiller is that it could only work in a comic strip. You know, you take it anyplace else, it's really not going to have the same impact. Why? Because Bushmiller was thinking about how to make a comic strip work, how to make a comic strip. And that's
Yeah.
what, you know, but it won't work. The same gag wouldn't work in a different place.
Right. And so it has a lot of similarities to some silent movies too, where he has gags that in reality, the person would hear the elephant right behind him and react. But he could have someone reading the newspaper with an elephant or an escaped lion right behind him.
Yeah, I forget who it was who said, but great cartooning is graphic design, you know, and graphic design when it works really well it's instantaneous. It conveys its message visually, right? And you know what it's talking about. It's arresting in its quality visually, but it communicates instantly. And great cartooning is in a lot of ways related to that. And certainly that's the case in Bushmiller's work. It is Caitlin said engineering. I think that's a great way of describing it. It's also another way of describing, graphic design in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And I mean, he figured how to boil things down to their basic elements but not oversimplify them, but not overcomplicate them either. There's enough there that it still has life and personality and its own like very distinct, recognizable style. But yeah, 3 rocks.
I was just thinking,
so
3 rocks. Exactly. Right. It's got to be not 2, not 4, right. 3.
So Milton Caniff once said, comic strip cartoonist is like, the screenwriter and the casting director and the scene, stage director and the actor and everything in your own little movie or stage play or whatever. And if you use that same analogy, I mean, Ernie Bushmiller was like the architect and the surveyor and the contractor and the builder of his own comic construction site. I mean,
that's a great way of putting it, his own construction site. Yeah, the comics page was his construction site. I love it. So let's see now. The day of the 25th, there's a lot going on, right? So what's going on? How does the day, progress? Where does it go?
So I can kind of walk you through our plans. The big kickoff is the night before. So Friday night on the 24th is with the official opening of the exhibit. So we'll have a big catered reception. Like I said, Nancy's favorite foods will be available. We're going to have lots of different stations set up for people to play 5-card Nancy if they'd like to, and some fun decorations and stuff. But then we really dive in on Saturday morning, first thing. So the day kicks off with the Nancy Summit, or the first official meeting of the Ernie Bushmiller Society. So,
okay, what's that about?
Dennis Kitchen has kind of long been the I don't know, I guess the head of the Ernie Bushmiller Society, even though it's supposed to be, it's a secret society. So who knows what's actually going on. But
is there a code ring or something?
As their representative, Dennis Kitchen will be gathering a group of esteemed elders who are, Nancy devotees, to be discussing their favorite Nancy strips, what the strip means to them, and talking a little bit about the society itself. Brian will be part of that panel.
Do they wear secret robes and things like that?
Maybe they will. We'll find out. So, and then
no one knows, even us.
Olivia James won't be attending in person, but will be attending virtually and giving a presentation about her take on Nancy in discussion with her agent, Sheena Wolf. Then in the afternoon, we've got Mark Newgarden and Paul Karasik, who wrote How to Read Nancy, giving their book talk about that, followed by Bill Griffith presenting on his graphic novel, 3 Rocks. All these folks and some others are going to be available for book signings after. And then in the evening, we have the world debut of A Morning with Ernie Bushmiller by Tom Gammill.
And Ernie Bushmiller.
That's the rundown. And there's other little fun things that are going to be going on, at the Billy Island throughout it. But it's really just a time to absorb as much Bushmiller artwork and information as possible.
And if
So,
Caitlin gets through that whole day, she's going to have to go in rehab, I think.
Yeah, I fly to France the next day, actually.
Oh,
I don't know,
really?
wow.
but
Oh my
yeah,
God.
so we'll see.
Well, so are there, I think I read something there were going to be costumes or people are encouraged to wear costumes?
We're totally encouraging people to come dressed in costume, especially on Friday night for the party. And we'll see. We'll see if people do that or not. I think it would be great.
My wife Abby's been looking for polka dot patterns and stuff.
And so Olivia James is a pseudonym, is it not?
Yes.
Yeah, so nobody knows who Olivia James really is.
I mean, somebody knows.
Somebody knows. Okay, but it's interesting to wonder, and
Yeah.
that'll be an interesting discussion, I'm sure.
And I'll also say that so even though Olivia's not going to be there in person, like I said, there will be this virtual presentation, and she's going to be making some very big announcements about the future of Nancy at
Oh, really?
presentation. So people
Wonder
have
what
to
that could be.
there. It's not going to be recorded, so people have to be there at Nancy Fest to find out about what's going
The
on.
future of Nancy.
Yeah, exactly.
That is really is there a Pixar movie or something coming our way?
I hope not.
I hope not too, because I mean, really, can you imagine? That would be absolutely so
Yeah,
wrong.
right.
Okay, are people from the syndicate coming?
Yeah,
Oh, good.
I think so. Yeah.
That's interesting. And then Mark Newgarden and Paul Karasik will be talking about how to read Nancy. And so who is in the Bushmiller Society? That's kind of an interesting. I wonder what's going to happen at that meeting. I mean,
The folks who are participating in that panel who will be here are Patrick McDonnell, the creator of Mutts, Kaz, who did Underworld for years and also works on SpongeBob, Gary Halgren, who's current comic strip artist, but also worked for Mad Magazine and was one of the air pirates, and Brian and Pete Maresca, who published the catalog and runs Sunday Press.
wow, that's fantastic. What a great group of people.
Moderated by Dennis Kitchen.
Right.
Moderator who's also
all those people are going to be there.
And they're all Nancy obsessives.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I wonder, at what point that someone just all of a sudden becomes a Nancy obsessive. I mean, how is it that Nancy worms its way into their psyche and overtakes them, as it were? It seems like it can be for some a long time coming. For some folks, it never happens. But in a lot of ways, once a person is into it, you are kind of clued into a worldview that is kind of unique in a way, isn't it?
Right.
Are there groups for other comic strips? I haven't heard of any of the comic strips that have this kind of following.
Yeah, I haven't either. I mean, I'm trying to think of.
I mean, there's not like a Ziggy one or
Ziggy.
Nothing quite like this, as far as I know. I mean, there's fandoms for everything, it seems, but this is something special, I think.
I mean, there's definitely a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek aspect to it. I found an interview that Dennis Kitchen did with I can't remember who it is, somebody that has I think a podcast or something, and they were trying to, because somebody was going around and putting like Nancy stickers on things at Comic Cons and depositing Nancy postcards into comic book shops and doing this kind of secret subterfuge to sort of get Nancy out there into the world. And this interviewer was convinced it was Dennis, and Dennis would not commit. Like, I don't really know. You're going to have to talk to somebody else. And, according to Rule 6 of the Bushmiller, and she said, well, if you know what Rule 6 is, then you're in the Bushmiller Society. And I said, well, Dennis would say, well, I can't speak off the record about that, and, so is there even, I mean, there are membership cards and pins and all kinds of stuff that's evidence of this existing, but there's never been a public meeting or any kind of records or documentation of any minutes of a meeting or anything like that
until now. Yeah, until Nancy Fest.
This is the first time. That's what it said in the promotional materials, right on the website.
Right.
the first meeting of the society. So will there be a call to order and all of that kind of stuff?
I believe so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we
Yeah, I
might
love
even
the
take
whole idea.
pledges, new members
We may
admitted.
induct new members. We'll see what Dennis wants to do.
There is something unique, I think, about this comic strip and the allegiance it seems to inspire. I know, as Caitlin suggested, there's fandom for all kinds of things, but this is really kind of unique in the sense that there is I don't know, there is this sense that once you're into it, you're into a language that other people don't understand. It's not like the same as being a fan of Calvin and Hobbes. It's something very, very different. And I find that that's part of what seems to be at the essence of the obsession, is that Nancy is a unique flavor that not everybody gets into. Well, this sounds like it's going to be a great time. I'm sorry I can't be there, but it certainly sounds like it's going to be wonderful for those who attend. And Caitlin, you said it was almost entirely sold out already.
It's getting very close.
Oh,
So
that's
I'd
great.
say we're more than 75% full.
Yep.
So, and even less of those tickets are available at the VIP level. So if people did want to get the VIP level, that comes with the swag bag of all kinds of cool Nancy stuff we're getting together, as well as admission to the private party on Saturday night with all the cool Nancy heads will be there. So there are not a lot of spots left for VIP, and probably about 75% full for general admission.
So when you say that, how many people are we thinking, or are you thinking of, or
Total will be just over 300.
over 300? So that'll be a crowded evening.
Right.
Yeah. And where exactly in the Billy Ireland does the play take place?
So everything takes place, all the programming takes place in the Gene and Charles Schultz Lecture Hall. So that's in the center of the building on the second floor. It's a 300-seat theater. That's where all these panels and presentations, as well as the play, will take place on Saturday. And on Friday, most of the festivities are in the galleries themselves and in our kind of like catering and party area.
And will I know, Brian, you said your son is documenting all of this. Will the play be filmed as well, and will that be available?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, yeah, Brian's going to be there. I mean, David's going to be there, and yeah, I'm hoping to take the play on the road after Ohio, but we'll see.
Take it on the road. And where?
Yeah,
sure. And where would it be playing?
I don't know. I can do it at your house.
I mean, to answer your question, like, it's not going to be available as in like, it won't be on YouTube or anything. I think clips of it will be in David Walker's documentary. But otherwise, you got to be there to see it.
Oh, yeah.
Well, they have this group in New York called Shakespeare in the Parking Lot, which is the drilling company. My wife ran the theater group. So you could have Bushmiller in the parking lot, New York City. That's all you need.
Absolutely.
Tom, I was just thinking, you wrote for Seinfeld, which was a show famously about nothing. Do you see any connection between that and your love of Nancy?
Yeah, sir. I mean, it's sort of weird comedies. It's like Bushmiller stuff surprises you. Like, who would have thought this would be a funny situation,
right,
of Sluggo holding a pinwheel up to a hobo's mouth? So, yeah, no, I think there's a lot of similarities between Seinfeld and Ernie Bushmiller. I think Jerry Seinfeld would agree. I think Larry David would say you're crazy.
I wonder if Seinfeld would be a Nancy fan.
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, Jerry's a fan of all comedy, and it's like he's a big Jerry Lewis fan. I think he definitely is a fan of Ernie Bushmiller.
No, he likes Superman, right?
We know that, yeah. When I see that panel, I'm like, I don't know about you, but I immediately think, okay, that's the first thing he thought of, was that snapper at the end. I mean, why? How did that come to his mind?
No, really. How can I get a hobo blowing on a pinwheel?
Well, there's certain themes. I mean, there's lots of hobos and hippies and
yes,
Martians and various stereotype kind of characters that kind of wander through Nancy, you know, and in props like plungers and you know, garden hoses and watering cans. And I mean, he said at one point that he often, when he was really desperate, he'd look in a Sears Roebuck catalog for ideas, you know. And we're going to actually have a Sears Roebuck catalog in these.
From what year?
Actually, it's the right year. It's like, because we have a picture of him at his drawing board. It's from 54, I think.
Oh, wow. Cool. Oh, that's an interesting art.
I have an original from 44 with a rubber boot in it, and the Sears Roebuck catalog from 44 has an exact same photo of it.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
You would just thumb through the Sears Roebuck catalog and go, a rubber boot, what can I do with that? You know, and just sit there until he got a gag trance. And
maybe he saw a pinwheel in a toy catalog and said, oh, what can I do with that? Okay, well, let's see. Sluggo's spinning it, and he gets bored, and how can he keep it going? And oh, he can come across a bum sleeping. That's the snapper. I don't know. I wish he was here.
Yeah. I think if we all sat there thinking about, well, what could Sluggo do with a pinwheel? Well, I mean, I'm not sure any of us would come up with a hobo sleeping, inhaling and exhaling. I don't think it wouldn't come to my mind.
But you know,
imagine if you had a partner and you had to explain, what about this for a joke? Like saying it out loud is like, no, that's a terrible idea.
Yeah.
You don't tell anyone, you just draw it. It's like, okay, that works.
But you know, as somebody that writes gags for a living, which is what I've been doing the last 3 days, it's amazing when you just zone into this place where you're trying to get this work done, you know, and you're thinking about it and you say, okay, let me see. Like a kid has a pinwheel and he goes to the park and he's like he needs somebody to spin it around for him. So what do you get, a dog or a bird or what happened? Maybe there's a hobo sleeping on the park bench, or, you know, the next thing you know, you've gone down some rabbit hole that doesn't even make any sense, you know, and it's like daydreaming or something, really. You know?
Then you show it to your kids and they say, what's a pinwheel?
Yeah. You know, Nancy was not locked into. It's interesting, Brian, as you're talking about writing gags, and I'm assuming you're talking about Beetle or High and Lois, but I'm thinking Beetle first, and Beetle is very much a situation comedy, right? It's Camp Swampy, and so the jokes take place in and around Camp Swampy and the military. Nancy's not really locked into any context really like that, no situation. I mean, it's ostensibly somewhere around the 1940s, an eternal 1940s, but oddly enough,
she lives with her aunt. Her aunt is sort of her boss. She'll occasionally teach her manners and stuff. But think about Sluggo has no adult supervision.
Right.
That's
none
really
whatsoever.
Yeah. And when they ask Ernie, what's the deal with his parents and stuff, he said, I don't really know. How does Ernie make money? He said, like, I imagine he has a job bagging groceries or something, but he never really, it wasn't like an in-depth documentary on the life of a homeless child, that's for sure.
He gets all these odd jobs. He works in an office, he works at a circus, you know.
Yeah.
But Sluggo just is, you know, there's no backstory, there's nothing. It's just Sluggo is what he is, and that's all he is, you know.
Totally.
You know, and
another thing I love is Sluggo had a really a good eye for the pretty 8-year-old girl who looked like a Vegas headshot girl. Bushmiller would draw these pretty girls out.
Hubba.
Yeah.
He always did that aspect of the strip never left from the beginning, from drawing Fritzy Ritz to the end. That was always a little part of it.
Yeah.
And like until the end, he would draw cars that looked like they were out of the 19 Little Rascals or something.
Absolutely, yeah. So, I mean, when do you feel like his style? I mean, he has this early style, right? When he's doing Fritzy Ritz before Nancy comes along. But when do you feel like his style really began to become the mature Bushmiller?
I don't know. That's what we were talking about before. There's differences of opinion about that, you know.
Mhm.
Like in the 40s, the reason I like the 40s is there's a lot of really nice like cross hatching and stuff. And
Yeah,
Nancy's had like her dress has patterns on it, and there's a little more detail in the backgrounds, and it just kind of gets more minimal
Mhm.
yeah.
through
The
the
40s,
50s into the
yeah,
60s.
the 40s are the most suitable for framing, I think, just in terms of
Yeah.
the good work. But yeah, then as you were saying, he just evolved. You know, as a newspaper, comics got smaller in the paper and stuff.
Right, right.
Just too.
And he adapted to that by
Yeah.
just simplifying. Tom, I'm curious, you were talking about the assistants in the 70s. Did he use assistants heavily to do the drawing work in the 70s as well as do writing gags? And
I think so. What do you think, Brian? It certainly seems like it.
I think that particularly in his later years, for the last 3 or 4 years, he couldn't really draw the strip anymore himself.
okay.
So he had these guys doing it full
He
time.
had Parkinson's, right?
But I think he had other assistants over the years that would. I'm not really sure. You know, I mean, that's always a kind of a well-kept secret with cartoonists. Like, you know, I mean, I know a lot of cartoonists that buy gags through the mail,
Mhm.
or you know, and you'd be surprised to find out who that is, or they have a
I'm,
ghost
I'm
artist.
surprised they still use the mail.
All right, all right. Maybe they don't use the mail, but they do it.
That's a gag right there.
One
Right.
thing that I know that he did a lot in the later years, and it was probably his assistants doing it for him. If you look at the originals, the ones Brian was mentioning, like the early stuff is super clean, but the later it gets, the more you see photo stats and paste ups of Nancy's head cut out and repeated over and over again so that he doesn't have to redraw it every time. And I think one of the things that Bill's book went into is just how challenging it was for some of these artists to get it exactly the way it was meant to. And
Mhm.
so it's clear that in some cases, in the later ones, they just made photocopies or photostats of it and repeated it that way. So the later originals have like sort of a collage quality because of that, because they were just copying certain elements over and over again.
Mhm.
So I'm guessing that's what a lot of the assistants were doing, but who knows? Maybe also lettering or
Yeah.
something too.
Sure, sure. It's one of the things that I think Bill Griffith says in the acknowledgments or whatever in the notes at the end of his book is that he didn't draw any of the images of Nancy in the book. You know, the three rocks that they're all from Ernie Bushmiller, which is interesting because I didn't know that till I got to the end. But you know, I think one of the things is the idea of trying to draw Nancy, as simple as it is, like Bushmiller, is incredibly intimidating, you know, because of the proportions that have to be. It's not like trying to draw, there are a zillion different versions of Charlie Brown, you know, that people have drawn over the years, and none of them are exactly like Charles Schulz, but there's some kind of, because of that, there's some kind of leeway there. But with Nancy, it's so, to borrow your phrase, Caitlin, engineered. It's so precise. The idea of taking it on really is kind of intimidating for anybody, even like somebody like Bill Griffith or Al Plastino, who are terrific artists in their own right. Trying to
I know
do
it was like I don't know when that was. Tom came out here when he had a very rough idea of what the play was going to be, and Tom and I met with Jim Carlson and spent a day. And Tom was just grilling, you know, Jim Carlson, like, what kind of scotch did he like? What was his favorite TV show? At night, did he wear slippers, or was he barefoot? Did he wear a bathrobe? You know, and
Yeah.
Carlson actually had answers to a lot of it. You know, like what did he do? Or he would just sit out in his backyard with a drink and look out into the woods. And you know, he had this little. You know, he wasn't a golfer, but he liked to hit golf balls into the woods. You know, and just little details. And I think what that indicates is kind of a frustration about dealing with somebody who is a little bit of a cartooning hero to us, you know, and but not being able to talk to him, you know, and he didn't really do very many interviews in his life.
And there's very little of him like on camera or anything. I mean, there's one thing when he's being interviewed by Fred Waring, and he talks very slow, and he's got a Bronx accent, and that's not how he's coming across in the play. In the play, he's talking faster, and I don't think it's going to be a historically accurate. Ernie talked. Max, my writing partner, he's been at all the shows, and he says, I start out with Ernie Bushmiller accent, but when I feel like I'm losing the crowd, I turn into Tom Gammill to bring them back in. I think that might happen in Ohio too.
Tom, how do you see Bushmiller? I mean, how do you imagine he was? I mean, as you pointed, you're saying it may not be historically accurate, but how do you envision him? What kind of person?
Well, for the show, I mean, he was very modest, and he didn't like to talk about himself, and he was very soft-spoken, and so my portrayal of him is more like a Jackie Gleason or Rodney Dangerfield, but it's going to be more like, hey, but I'm trying to let his work do a lot of the talking for him.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think for to make an entertaining hour, my portrayal of him is a lot more lively than he probably was in real life.
Is there a situation?
I hope people don't turn on me like, hey, how dare you make Ernie Bushmiller look like that? That's why I wanted to come out and see Jim Carlson, his friend. And when Brian and I met with him, it's like, look, I'm making him sort of more like a Jackie Gleason or Rodney for entertainment purposes. And he seemed okay with that, right, Brian?
Yeah, I mean, I think you were just picking up on little details, like what were some of his favorite books, or like he and Abby, his wife, would go out to dinner. That was something that they liked to do. And Tom was saying, well, what kind of restaurants did they go to? And did they have cocktails? And I think details like that kind of inform the personality. But I think what Tom is doing is basically, you're playing Ernie Bushmiller. You're not trying to act like him, like in a documentary or anything.
And I play him in the year is 1976, when he's sort of near the end of his career,
Mm-hmm.
and the world is really changing around him. So part of it is, I'm playing him sort of amusedly befuddled, but not. I'm not making him angry or anything.
Mm-hmm.
But right, Caitlin? I mean, like,
yeah, I agree completely. I mean, I think, in the play, Tom turns Ernie Bushmiller into a Nancy character almost, or something. I mean, because I feel like when you're doing anything that there's just not that much information about this person, there's not enough primary sources to mimic exactly how they acted and behaved and moved and stuff. You just have to fill in the blanks. And so I feel like, Tom, you've really just with the few interviews there are with Bushmiller, you've kind of clung on to some specific quotes and expanded on them to build a personality out around that, and it works really well. And it's very much of the time. So there's a lot of stuff that's very specific to the time period, the way people talked, the costuming. It's so.
It is 1976, which there's some non-PC things for these days, but.
Right.
But Caitlin plays, for instance, one of the characters she plays is a college student. So if he says something that's not entirely, she's there to go like, you can't say that. It's 1976. You can't say that. And, in fact, there's some stuff Ohio State isn't letting me say. But
oh wow!
Really?
And so there's an uncut version somewhere.
Yeah, no, it's just sort of but also I've been doing it in my house for 22 people. There's this famous series of photos where Ernie Bushmiller and other members of the National Cartoonist Society were drawing on bathing suits that were filled with models. Mm-hmm. And you show those to an audience today. You can't show more than 3 or 4 without the women turning on you. Mm-hmm. And so that's been. But we show those photos during the play.
Okay.
But I think Tom figured out a way to make it so that it's time period accurate, but we're still bringing it into modern times with some of the female characters that I play that are kind of correcting it. Or making it clear that it's very much of the time,
So Ernie Bushmiller brings out this scrapbook and he goes, I don't show this around my wife because she makes a lot of disapproving noises. And then as you show the photos, you hear those same noises in the audience. And I go, yeah, that's right, like that noise. So, so that works pretty well.
So was this a play that was long time in the offing? Was it something that you were thinking about writing for a long time?
Well, yeah, it's about a year ago, the idea of Nancy Fest came along, right? And then they said, Tommy, what do you want to do? And I said, oh, I'll give a talk like that. And then the talk sort of turned into, hey, it'd be funny to do it as a play. And so, I was making notes because I was working on the set of Curb Your Enthusiasm at the time. And there'd be sort of like some downtime at lunch that I would be making notes and going through Sears Roebuck catalogs and stuff. But so I had a script, but it wasn't until you start actually performing it, like when we started Zooming and stuff, that you start seeing what works. And then in front of an audience, then stuff you thought was working for months, you go, oh, that's not working. And you adopt it. And so I'm confident by the time of the actual show, it'll work pretty well.
Did you have an idea of the arc of the play? Like, where you wanted to get to in the play?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's like it's in the world of Ernie Bushmiller, so it doesn't have to totally make sense. It's like the hobo blowing the pinwheel. It's sort of just stick with it. Yeah, accept the premise, and everything will be fine.
Yeah. Don't think about it too much.
Yeah.
Have there been a lot of? I mean, I'm trying to think of. I'm thinking more of TV, but there've been a couple of representations of cartoonists on television. I'm thinking of Ted Knight, right? Played a cartoonist on TV.
Yeah. They're never very accurate. I mean, the craziest one is in How to Murder Your Wife, where he played a bachelor in New York and he had servants and
yeah, right. It was supposed to be like Al Cap or something, wasn't it?
I love that movie.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's like, I don't know any cartoonist that ever had a butler,
Right.
You had a limousine that drove him around, lived in a Upper West Side penthouse. But actually, the only cartoonist I can think of that even comes close to that was Peter Arno.
Yes. And his cartoons look like that, the New York cartoons. And then there was that My World and Welcome to It, which was loosely based on James Thurber with William Wyndham.
Oh, yes, I remember that. It was on for a very brief amount of time, right?
Yeah. That was in the 60s.
Yeah.
But to portray a cartoonist is pretty boring. You're sitting at your drawing table for 6 hours at a time.
Oh.
So.
Well, that's why I was so taken with this idea that you were doing a play, and how the heck you write a play about somebody who's working at, in this case, 4 drawing tables.
Yeah, 4 drawing tables. So it's nice. We got the drawing tables on those party tables. So I'm standing. So I'm going between table to table that way. Mm-hmm. And there's a telephone, and there's a door to the outdoors and a door to the house. So
it's a very simple set, and I mean, it's not all based in reality. So you'll see the way that it becomes interesting.
See, there's this turtle behind me. Yeah, he's in the play.
That's great. I love it. Well, folks, I think we've sort of come to the end of our discussion here. I think it's been a great conversation. It's been a lot of fun talking about this, and I really think Nancy Fest is just going to be dynamite. And I'm envious of all those who get to Columbus and the Billy Ireland Museum on the 24th and 25th to attend. So,
and Caitlin, how long is the show on for?
The show will be up through November 3rd. So it's open all summer. Our galleries are always free and open to the public. The only day they're closed are Mondays. So we're open 1 to 5, Tuesday through Sunday. And another great time to come out to see the show will be during our big annual comics festival, Cartoon Crossroads Columbus, which is in the, I want to say it's the last weekend of September this year.
I will be there for
Fabulous.
that.
Oh, great. So you'll get to see the exhibit.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to it. Yep, absolutely. I'm going to make that. It's on my list of things to do in Columbus when I get there.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to that. Can't miss it. Well, thank you all for being here today, taking the time out of your day. I really appreciate it. And again, just, hey, have a great time on the 24th and 25th. Congratulations to all of you. And I hope it's a wonderful, wonderful weekend.
Oh, this is really fun. Thanks for doing this.
Thanks a lot.
You betcha.
See you soon.
All right, bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay. Well, I hope up that wet your whistle for Nancy and all things Nancy, and I hope if you have a chance, you get to head on out to the Billy Ireland in Columbus, Ohio, and check out Nancy Fest, or at the very least, maybe if you're driving out towards the west or across country from whichever direction, at some point you'll stop in Columbus and check out the Nancy Show to see this wonderful exhibition of Ernie Bushmiller art, as well as much more. If it has wet your whistle for Nancy and you're looking for more, look no further, because in a couple of weeks I'll be talking to the author of the biography, the graphic biography of Ernie Bushmiller, Bill Griffith, here to talk about his book, 3 Rocks, the life story of Ernie Bushmiller. And not only that, but also to talk about his incredible career and his wonderful comic strip Zippy, as well as his great series of graphic novels that he's been putting out for the last few years. Just some stellar work. I mean, so much to talk about with Bill Griffith. I'm really looking forward to that. So if you're interested in Nancy, we've got more coming right at you here on Blockhead. So stick around, okay? 2 weeks from today, or this week, whatever day this is that I post this, on May 15th, Wednesday at May 15th at 3 p.m., I am going to be a live guest on the DNA show with Andy Smith, who was our guest last time here on Blockhead, and his writing partner on Cordrath, The Reckoning, and Cordrath, The Awakening, Dennis Turner. And so I'll be a guest on their show that Wednesday afternoon at 3 p.m. And I'll be talking about my next project, which is going to be a Kickstarter this summer, and featuring Captain Daiquiri Jones and the Space Rockettes in their second big adventure, but this time given the very special tabloid newsprint treatment, just like Donut and the Cheeseburger before. I was so excited about the way that turned out. Captain Daiquiri Jones is getting the same treatment for her second issue, and I got to tell you, it's looking great, and I'm really excited about it. So that's going to serve as like the introduction. The link will be up to the Kickstarter. You'll be able to follow it before its official kickoff in June. It'll probably be in June when the kickoff is actually happen, but the beginnings of it will be then. So I'm really excited about that, and I'm looking forward to talking with Andy again, and with Dennis, who I haven't spoken to in the past, but Andy and I had a great time when he was a guest on the show, and so it was very nice of him to invite me on the DNA show. Looking forward to it. That, I think, is it for today. And I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope that you'll be looking forward to our next celebration of Nancy with Bill Griffith in a couple of weeks. So until then, I hope you will be well, be safe, be happy. Hope you're enjoying the spring wherever you are. And as always, thanks for listening.